Today on Jay Sekulow Live, the fight against the deep state continues. The ACLJ files in federal court.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, we're taking your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. The ACLJ is filed in federal court. This is part of our FOIA lawsuit to try and produce the documents from the government on the unmasking. And the ACLJ has been on this. This is obviously in the recent news because of the high-profile names that have come out through the unmasking. But the ACLJ, we've been working on this years now. It's actually years, and we're going to take your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. But, Dad, this is something, again, this is not new for us. This is not something we're just reporting on or discussing, but it's something we've been involved in from the start.
Well, we're actually in federal court today. I mean, we are literally in court today fighting over that whole issue of when you get documents, they redact them or they don't provide you the documents at all. So we're going to get to the bottom of what was going on here, but we know a lot already. And what we know is unbelievably troubling. It's everyone from Samantha Powers all the way to Joe Biden. And Andy, in the course of thinking this through, you and I talked over the weekend, I cannot imagine the justification for all these unmaskings to the last day, the last hours of the Obama administration.
There is no justification, Jay, except snooping and wanting to see who is coming in and what are they saying and how can we discredit them. What possible reason can the Secretary of the Treasury, as an example, or the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of San Marino, which is a country within Italy, want to know the identities of the American persons who were involved and intercepted in foreign intelligence eavesdropping on foreign parties? What possible reason would you want to know that except to try to discredit them or try to find out what was going on in the incoming Trump administration that you really had no legitimate business knowing?
Which raises another point, of course, and I'm going to go to Fan. Let me go to Fan on this, and I'll give it back to Jordan. And that is, Washington is now taking a look at on this, especially Senator Graham.
Yeah, Senator Graham has announced, Jay, he's going to do a series of investigations into all of these issues. And look, the filing that we're going to make today, Jay, is going to speak directly to one of the questions that I think Senator Graham should be asking, and I'm confident that he will. And that's the fact that why has the deep state, the bureaucracy, continued to give people like the ACLJ these Glomar responses, refusing to admit or even acknowledge that there are records? Jay, we have caught them now because that release of names yesterday included at least 7 State Department officials, so they can no longer give us that response. They have acknowledged that there are records that were responsive to our request. In fact, there are at least 7 State Department employees among those 39 that were released next week. So, Jay, as we continue to litigate, we've always said that's one of the pieces. The other piece has to be Congress. Senator Graham has said he's going to go for it. You're going to put those together. And, Jay, it's already breathtaking how sweeping it is going to be, but it just continues to grow every single day.
All right, Jordan, it's up to you to figure out what happens next politically. We'll talk about that when we come back from the break.
All right, 1-800-684-3110. You can join us today on the broadcast with your thoughts and your comments. How do you think this will affect, or do you think it will affect the elections in 2020? We are taking your phone calls now, 1-800-684-3110. As always, go to aclj.org. That's aclj.org. Stay updated on all of the cases, all of the work. But as we just discussed, we are filing today in federal court on unmasking. And you couldn't do that if you weren't already working on this. As Stan said, this is part of our FOIA work, and it's pushing to get the documents. As he said, they were caught. 1-800-684-3110. We'll be back on Jay Sekulow Live. right, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Dad, I want to go to you right off the bat because this is, again, it's in the news a lot now. We discussed it right from the start. I don't think any of us could have imagined that the final name 8 days before their term was done would be Joe Biden, and that Joe Biden would be the nominee. Because if you go back to our broadcasts early on in the Democrat primary, that was not – it was a campaign with high hopes that it looked like it was faltering. But now we know it's the Joe Bidens, and it's not their chief of staff. It's actually Joe Biden that's listed. It's to make the request, and that is a differentiating factor because when it was the president, he had the chief of staff do it, Dennis McDonough. I mean, this is again we're talking the most powerful names in Washington D.C. that were behind these unmasking requests.
Well, I think we have to be realistic, too, as to exactly what this entails. And as you said, it starts with Samantha Power. The last one is Joe Biden. I think right near the end, he may have been the last day. And this whole unmasking was part of this whole Russia crossfire hurricane investigation that we are learning every moment was a complete fraud on the American people. I mean, this is, and look what's happened to General Flynn. And now we got a federal judge that's out of control. But Andy, I want to talk about we've got lawyers, Ben Sisney's in court right now on the Freedom of Information Act issue. I think it's important for people to understand we're having to litigate because even when documents are being released, they are being redacted. Explain to everybody what that means so they understand what we're fighting here.
Okay, what we are fighting in redacting documents is simply this. When the government turns over documents, they black out and mark out sometimes paragraphs and pages of information saying that this is not information that we are prepared to release to the public for a variety of reasons. Some are security reasons, some are because it creates a danger to the person whose name would be put out in public. Sometimes it would implicate a person who is innocent. So we're getting redactions and redactions, that is, blank marked through with a big black magic marker so we can't see who it is. And we want to know what is the legitimate security interest or what is the legitimate appropriate interest that is being saved that is being protected, I should say, by the government by these redactions. Come forth and challenge these redactions is what we are doing and make the government prove why they're being taken out and what the legitimate purpose is. Look, the idea is that we have a right to know. And if the government says you don't, then it's the burden of the government to show why.
All right, 1-800-684-3110. Let's go right to the phones. Karen in Georgia on line 1. Karen, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Jay. Thank you. Hi. I was calling because I had a question. I'm getting a little confused about all the different investigations. So I see you guys, ACLJ is doing lawsuits. Okay, Durham's doing an investigation, the origins of the Russia investigation. Now Senator Graham's going to be investigating the unmasking. I'm trying to find out where these all come together. Like, do they all end up going to Durham, or what good will Lindsey Graham's investigation do? Will there be prosecutions from that? I just don't know how all these go together.
That's a really great question, Karen, and let me try to briefly hit it, and then I'll let Dan explain the Senate. So what we did was we initiated a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. It's what Andy was just talking about, and in that we request various documents happen to be dealing with this issue of unmasking. And when we do that, that gives us access to documents, or at least it's supposed to. And one of the issues that happened here was they redacted a lot of it, which means, as Andy said, they covered it. So we're going back to court to get those released to find out who was organized. We have found out a lot of information in these cases. So that is our lawsuit through the ACLJ, American Center for Law and Justice, against the State Department and the NSA to get an understanding of what took place. Then you have the Senate investigation. I'm going to let Fan talk about the Senate side of this, and then Jordan and Andy can talk about the Durham side. But Fan, why don't you focus in on the Senate?
Yeah, so Karen, let me give you a very specific example of where the Senate can add a missing piece here. We've talked about it a lot about this January 5th Oval Office meeting where Susan Rice says that President Obama asked Sally Yates and Jim Comey to stay behind and have a deeper conversation about Mike Flynn. We learned last week when these names were unveiled that Dennis McDonough, President Obama's chief of staff, was one of the people that did unmasking, and he did it on that exact date, January 5th. We have an email inside our FOIA request that we uncovered in this litigation we're talking about, where Dennis McDonough is communicating with Ambassador Power and Susan Rice about how they are going to act during this transition period. This is where what Andy just said comes in. We have that information, but at the bottom of that email, there's a whole paragraph that is redacted, so we don't know what that conversation was. Senator Graham's investigation can uncover that redaction because they have a clearance level that we do not have. So we've said this so many times, Jay, but these are puzzle pieces that fit together. Some are on the outside, some are on the inside, and then ultimately, I think they will all end in John Durham's office. But you don't have a complete picture, Jay, unless the Senate or the House, although the House is not going to do it in this case, intervene, take the pieces that we've uncovered, and find the missing pieces to lay them on top of each other.
All right, 1-800-684-3110. I would just add this. We have talked about these issues. We have been filing the FOIA request to get the information out. But up until 2 weeks ago, this had not really broken through to the next level. Dad, when we're talking to our audience, I do have to remind they are extremely up to date on what's going on. But it takes weeks for a story like this to kind of filter through to most folks who don't pay close attention or aren't as well informed. And just traveling right now, I'm seeing it.
No, that's exactly, you're exactly correct. I mean, the problem is, and I'm going to make the substance of this, the problem is litigation takes a long time, but we've uncovered a lot of very important documents. I want to be clear on that. It's not as if we haven't uncovered really important documents. But, Andy, this is federal court litigation, and you're asking the government to disclose documents. That's not an easy burden.
Extremely difficult burden, Jay, because the propensity and the inclination of the government is to not disclose the document and to say that we need to hide the document and we need to keep it concealed because there's sensitive information that if it got out to the public, it might harm somebody, or it may give out national secrets of information, or it may implicate somebody who's really innocent. So we're fighting a serious uphill battle against a government that has the upper hand. I've got to tell you, we have got to make the showing of why the redaction is necessary, although in point of fact, it is the government. The truth of the matter is that we are the ones that are fighting the battle, and the government is sitting back and just smugly saying, can't see this information, secret, we don't want to put it out. We have got to be the ones in there fighting to get it unmasked and unreleased.
And literally today we're doing just that.
Jerry, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hey, team, who does the redactions? Is there a way of knowing who did the redactions, and what's their premise and authority to redact?
Okay, so it's a great question. There's an office within these various agencies, including the National Security Administration, and in that office they have compliance people that comply. And in a situation like this, they comply, and then they have a group that does redactions, and they'll say it's either sensitive or classified or not subject to one of the exemptions. So what you end up doing is going over to fight with them over the issue of exemptions, which is precisely and exactly what we're doing. We're fighting over the exemptions.
And I think it's important to point out, too, these are government documents, government emails. There's not the sense, if you were using the official channels, it's not the sense that this would be kept secret. The idea is that it won't be unless there's something specific. But the government, and just briefly, the government's position, and this is administration to administration, as my dad said, this office is there. You have to almost always go through the round one to get the next level of info, because their idea is we'll redact more and let's see what they really want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're going to redact more, and then we're going to see if they can prevail in getting us to have this opened up. So really it is a fight that's kind of backwards. They're supposed to be the ones to bear the burden of showing why it shouldn't be released, but it's turned out that we're the ones that are fighting it and trying to show the burden that it should be released. So it's kind of backwards, but we are persisting in doing this, and we intend to find out just exactly, for example, other than mere curiosity, what's Joe Biden wanting to ask unmask Mr. Flynn only a few days before leaving office as vice president? What possible reason could he have had to do that? And anything
I go back to that because these unmasking requests are very specific. I'm going to continue to take your phone calls, but they are not about like if if your staff member made a request, that's whose name would be listed, and that's very clear from the documents. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. We'll be back. All right, 1-800-684-3110. We're here on Jay Sekulow Live. We're discussing ACLJ. We're in federal court today. It related to the unmasking. And I will say that if you weren't already involved in this work, you would not have, you're not just talking about this for 2 weeks. And the ACLJ, we've been on this, and if you're a regular listener to Jay Sekulow Live, from the start, before that, before we would even make allegations at the time that it was Joe Biden making these requests. I mean, and the chief of staff to the president of the United States.
Well, I think, look, you got to look at. I look at the whole thing as a package, and that is Samantha Powers. I look at Susan Rice. I look at, of course, Joe Biden, and asking why were they doing it when they were doing it? Why did they have an executive order changing the sharing of intelligence literally, 18 days before the administration was over? And why were they engaging in this unmasking literally at the hour before or hours before the new president, President Trump, was being sworn in? And then I think that's going to be a lot of explaining for them to do on Capitol Hill. We're going to get the information through our lawsuits, but they will have to explain that to the United States Senate.
Yeah, and I go back to what Andy said, Jay. I just think they've lost the benefit of the doubt on this. I mean, when you go through this litigation, there are a lot of different exemptions that the government can claim, and they claim them repeatedly. We're used to seeing them. But in this email we've talked so much about between Dennis McDonough and Susan Rice and Samantha Power, for example, Jay, the exemption that they claim is one called B5. And, Jay, that is the deliberative process exemption, basically saying if we're deliberating in order to try to decide how to make a decision, that is exempt. Jay, I got to tell you, given all of the abuses that we have seen and the nefarious purposes for which this unmasking has been used, claiming a very broad, generic, deliberative process exemption is just not good enough. If it was an exemption like Andy was talking about, national security or to conceal the identity of an innocent person, that would be one thing. This is just simply a deliberative process exemption for a conversation that happened inside the White House involving individuals who are either running for office now or, more importantly, Jay, abuse this process in the beginning. So again, this is where the Senate comes in. They can look at that paragraph and say, deliberative process, not good enough. You're going to answer our questions.
But, Andy, we're not asking for confidential communications or classified documents unless they've been unclassified. So I want to be clear on that.
No, we're not asking for classified. We know better than to ask for sensitive classified information. We're asking for information regarding who did the unmasking and give me the reason for the unmasking. Give me the legitimate interest that Samantha Power or that Obama's chief of staff or that the Treasury Secretary or Brennan or Clapper or any one of these operatives had for seeking to unmask General Flynn. Tell me what it is. I have a right to know as a citizen what it is that you are doing to unmask an American citizen. That's the thing, Jay, that bothers me more than anything else. You are talking to foreign nationals, and in the process, you intercept the communication of an American citizen. You're supposed to mask that American citizen. Now I want you to tell me why you say you don't have to do that, and you opened his face up to the public, and you've exposed him. You tell me the reason why you're doing that. I want to know.
Well, that's
right,
the goal that we're going to find out.
1-800-684-3110. Let's go to James calling from California on line 3. James, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Thank you for taking my call. Here's my frustration. In light of what we're finding out that Brennan, Obama, Susan Rice, Samantha Powers, Joe Biden were in this conversation just before Obama's going to exit, is Obama going to be held accountable? They're going to question him. It seems to me that he's untouchable. You can't touch the man. Can we ask him questions? Are you going to be caught on the carpet?
Let me address that. First of all, when he was the president of the United States, he has broad authority on national security information. He can get national security data. That's within his sphere. That's something he's allowed to do. So I want to be clear on that. I don't want to overplay that. Now, as far as ordering the unmasking, could he be asked questions? It's not going to be a prosecution of President Obama. I don't see that at all. I think what is more likely is if there's questions. But the president could be claiming executive privilege can be claimed even when you leave the White House. I just argued some of this at the Supreme Court of the United States, and I think even if it's a president you don't agree with, I think it's important that, Jordan, those protections are in place for presidents to make the kind of decisions they have to make every single day. Yeah,
I think it's more enlightening. Attorney General Barr said today, John Durham is not prosecuting President Obama. I mean, he's now usually you wouldn't even get out in front of that. You wouldn't even, but this is the idea that you go there. But the truth is, we are looking at this from all these different aspects. And then in Washington right now, the truth is, without the moves we've made over the last couple of years, and this term unmasking that now we assume people know what we're talking about now when we use that term. But the idea here is, again, that this is really only broken through mainstream. It's only broken through to a Senate investigation in the last 2 weeks. Our folks are educated on it, but that's the very small minority.
The information that was put out last week, Jordan, wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to the general public unless you could overlay it with some of the information we've gotten in this case. And again, this case dates back to 2017, so we had to show patience, we had to show persistence. And the other thing I would say, and this is just related to the conversation that Jay and Handy had about President Obama, look, we have to make sure that we're not just focused on President Obama. It is very clear in our communication that Ambassador Power really spearheaded a lot of this. Now, I do think some of the direction came out of the White House, but just let me give you one very specific example, Jordan. We know that in front of the House Intelligence Committee, Ambassador Power testified that she had, quote, no recollection of ever once making an unmasking request of General Flynn. But we know from the information lately that there were 7 requests made by her in the course of just a few weeks: November 30th, December 2nd, December 7th, December 14th, twice, December 23rd, and January 11th. So, you don't have to get to this grand conspiracy to understand that at least Ambassador Power, who is engaging in this persistent unmasking of General Flynn over a very short period of time, then went in front of the United States Congress and said she had no recollection. Jordan, I do not believe that. I don't think she could make 7 unmasking requests over the course of about 5 weeks and not remember it. But that's what she told the United States Congress.
And we're also, the American public is becoming now exposed to these powers. And like you were talking about with Samantha Power, the 7 unmasking requests, that was just on this. So, I mean, what would this broad power, it would make sense to have the power, but how was it being used? And was it being used to benefit politically, which would violate the law? Or was it being used for legitimate purposes? It doesn't. I can't imagine where this goes. Legitimate purposes with Vice President Biden. But again, that's only been the last couple of weeks that we even know this information. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Second half hour, Jay Sekulow Live is coming up. Check out ACLJ.org. That's ACLJ.org. We'll be right back on Jay Sekulow Live.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Hey everybody, welcome to the broadcast, and we are in federal court. I'm not, as you can tell, but Ben Sistney from our office is handling it via phone. That's how you do court arguments these days. We're fighting over a FOIA request, very relevant to the unmasking of General Flynn, and the information that we've shared over the last several years on this is now coming to fruition, and we're getting real information, but we're having a fight to get other information. So I want you to know we are fighting literally in court today, where we've received documents, but they have been redacted. That means they have been looked at, and a determination was made by the government agency that they were not going to release those documents. We are challenging those. And Andy, again, I want to underscore what we're looking for. We're looking for connections. We're looking for who spoke to who. Why in the last days of the administration were they making these changes? We are not asking for classified documentation. Andy?
We have never asked for classified, secret, sensitive information dealing with national security or anything like that. What we want to know is, why are you unmasking the name of General Flynn, for example? What authority did the Obama Chief of Staff, the Treasury Secretary, Samantha Power, the ambassador to Italy, the ambassador to Turkey, and all these low and high-ranking officials of the intelligence community seek to unmask the identity of Lieutenant General Flynn in the waning days of the Obama administration? Was it mere curiosity? Was it to target him? Was it to attack him? Was it to do what they wanted to do in that memo that surfaced, to try him and see that if you can get him to lie, then maybe you can prosecute him or fire him from office? What are the legitimate reasons that you want an American citizen's face to be disclosed to the public when otherwise you have no business doing so? That's what I want to find out.
And I can't think of a better way to put it in words than the actual words of the Attorney General of the United States, Attorney General Barr. Take a listen to this.
The law enforcement and intelligence apparatus of this country were involved in advancing a false and utterly baseless Russian collusion narrative against the president. The proper investigative and prosecutive standards of the Department of Justice were abused, in my view, in order to reach a particular result.
Now, I want you to know something. You've got to listen very carefully what he said. He said a particular view was used to get a result, not supported by law. So the Department of Justice has an investigation going on with John Durham. He's the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut, very, very well-respected guy. We have our work going on at the American Center for Law and Justice looking at a lot of these issues. Of course, I lived, and as did Andy and Jordan, the Mueller probe for almost 3 years, and when the president was vindicated. And now you have the Senate looking at it. Now, Pam, we only have about a minute and a half here before the break, but let's explain what Senator Graham is doing, which kind of puts it all together.
Yeah, I mean, it really ties into exactly what you just said that we're challenging in court today. These B5 redactions, Jay, these are legitimate redactions. They're deliberative due process. But if the Department of Justice, specifically the Attorney General, has concluded that improper means were used, you can read between the lines, for a political purpose, then, Jay, deliberative process to arrive at that end is something that the Senate is going to have a very vested interest in looking at that process. How did they come to decide that these were the mechanisms that were needed to take? And Jay, you made a good point that we're not seeking the classified information, but the Senate Judiciary Committee that he chairs, they can absolutely view that information behind the scenes to get more information to see what went on to make those decisions.
All right, we're going to take your calls at 1-800-684-3110. We come back from the break. We're going to talk about this double standard that was put in place. What does that mean? I'm also going to give you an update on a couple of other cases. So there's a lot we want to talk about. Our phone lines are open for you at 1-800-684-3110. So if you've got a question or a call, you can call us that way. If you want to get a question in via Facebook or Periscope, you could do that as well. But again, the ACLJ in court today. When I say in court, these days, in court means that we're on a phone argument involving getting information that we feel is relevant to our investigation of this unmasking fiasco that was going on, the double standard that was put in place. But again, come back from the break. Your calls, 1-800-684-3110. The Attorney General of the United States has been very direct on all of this and very direct on how he thinks this should be viewed. And I want to play for you another soundbite of his where he talks about this double standard that we've been arguing exists. And we saw it come to play, of course, in the impeachment proceeding. We saw it play here. Take a listen.
We saw two different standards of justice emerge, one that applied to President Trump and his associates, and the other that applied to everybody else. We can't allow this ever to happen again.
I think he's 100% correct. And Andy, we know from the Mueller probe that they knew there was no Russia collusion very early on in this investigation, really early on in this investigation.
Well, that's absolutely true, Jay. That was a hoax, and the president used the term hoax, and it is a hoax. They knew that there was none, but they were determined to create an illusion of collusion with the Russians with respect to the 2016 election. In other words, where there was no crime, they were going to make a crime, and they tried their best for 2 years with 18 prosecutors to fabricate a criminal offense. It's all unraveling right now and falling apart, and it was just a setup of trying to discredit the incumbent president of the United States. Shameful conduct on Bob Mueller's part. He's paraded himself as, as I've said many times, the John Adams of the United States, inviolate in his personality, going to former Marine officer and so forth. But what did he do? He presided over a group of people who were nothing but prosecutors seeking another pelt on their belt.
All right, let's go ahead. We're going to go right back to the phones. Eric is calling from New Mexico. He's on line 4. Eric, welcome to broadcast. You're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. My question is, let's say Susan Rice or Sally Yates or any of these other characters got questioned and they pled the fifth. Yep. What does that exactly mean, and how would you move forward with the prosecution?
Well, any individual citizen accused of a crime, I'll go back to Andy on this in a moment, has the constitutional right to not incriminate themselves. And guilty people use the Fifth Amendment, but so do innocent people. We've advised clients that were completely innocent to not go in and talk to government agencies at particular times because of bias or animus or where we thought things were askew to begin with. But you'd have to work around it. So, Andy, in building a case, it just can't. You can never compel the defendant to testify. So a prosecutor doesn't build the case based on the testimony from the oral testimony from that witness, Andy.
No, in a criminal case, if you take the Fifth Amendment, no inference can be drawn adverse to you. But if it's a civil case, and you plead the Fifth Amendment, the inference can be drawn that the answer would not have been favorable to you. So these administrative proceedings and some of these congressional proceedings may be able to draw the inference, if anyone pleads the Fifth Amendment, that the answer would not have been favorable to the person who asserts the privilege. Not so in a criminal case.
Than, you bring up the point that also a lot of these people have already testified.
Yeah, and I was actually going to follow up on what Andy just said. I mean, a lot of the privileges that would apply in a courtroom are a little bit adjusted when you go in front of Congress. And if that privilege has been waived, there might be a way around it. Specifically, Jada, let me just give you an example. Samantha Power, I'm holding the testimony that she gave to the House Intelligence Committee in my hands right now for those of us who are watching. We know what it says. There are some redactions in there. One of the things that it says in there is that she has no recollection of making these unmasking requests. So if she were to go into a court of law and plead the Fifth, I would expect the United States House would probably want to call her back and question her further on this testimony that she has already given. Because, Jay, I just don't think any reasonable person believes that she can make 7 unmasking requests of what ultimately ended up being the same person over the course of 5 weeks and not have any recollection of that. So if that were to play out, I would expect the United States House, if there was a change of control, or Chairman Graham, Jay, might want to call her back and question her about this testimony that we already have.
No, exactly right. One of the things that a lot of these members of the Senate have said is that and we have said it too, of course, is that the Justice Department is not supposed to be used for partisan political purposes. But that's exactly what was going on in Crossfire Hurricane. If you look at the entire investigation, that's what it was. I mean, that's what it focused on. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is what happens next? We'll take your calls on that at 1-800-684-3110. What do you want to see happen in these cases? 800-684-3110. Also, here's what Bill Barr said, the Attorney General of the United States, about utilizing the Department of Justice, the FBI, for partisan gain.
The criminal justice system will not be used for partisan political ends. And this is especially true for the upcoming elections in November.
So I think the marker's being laid down that they're not going to put anyone through what the president went through, Andy, in this last go-round with Crossfire Hurricane. Not the Democrats, not the Republicans. No one's going to be put, and that's good for the country.
Not as long as Bill Barr is the Attorney General. They're not. You finally have an Attorney General who's got the courage to stand up and say that the Justice Department is not a tool for partisan politics, and I think he means it, and he's going to do it, and he's going to put into effect whatever measures are necessary to ensure that what happened under Obama, Holder, Lynch, does not happen again.
We got a great question that came in on Facebook from Lee, and let me read it here. It says, when they are requesting unmasking, do they have to put in the reason why they are requesting to unmask? That's a great question, because I'm not exactly sure what the internal procedure is. I'm sure there is reason, but I think it would be very, Than, you may know more about this aspect than I do, but I think that the reason has to be subject to national security interests, concerns over foreign influence. It's probably pretty broad. It shouldn't be, but I think it was.
Yeah, it has to be in scope, and there has to be a legitimate purpose for requesting it. But, Jay, this is actually exactly on point to why we think so many of these were inappropriate, because if you look at the list of people who were trying to unmask General Flynn, I mean, even the high-profile ones, Jay, what does the ambassador to the United Nations, why does she need the identity of the incoming director of national intelligence? And then you go down the line. Some of these are people that, the general public has never heard of. Patrick Conlon. Why does Patrick Conlon need to know the identity of incoming Trump administration officials? So there does have to be a legitimate purpose. It has to be in scope. But what is conclusively clear from this list, Jay, is the wide swath of people who are requesting the unmasking of General Flynn. You could maybe, Jay, make a case that a handful of them had a legitimate reason to request it. There is no case to be made that everybody from Joe Biden to Susan Rice to Samantha Power to Patrick Conlon to Jacob Lew, Jay, there's no case to be made that all of them needed that information.
The UN ambassador and the Treasury Secretary. I mean, think about that one for a moment. And why didn't they just go to their counterparts? I mean, the whole thing makes no sense. But let me take it a step further. You've got to look at where this is going. And if you're just joining us, if you haven't been listening to the broadcast, we are in federal court right now. Now, in federal court these days doesn't mean what it used to. It means that we had a phone argument going on today on getting more access to documents, so we can put all of this together. We've done multiple quarterly reports from our Government Accountability Project. This obviously will be part of that. So again, we're looking at the whole tapestry of what's happened here to try to get a framework so that we can report to the American people, Andy, what took place.
Well, that's exactly right. We simply want to know what happened, why it happened, why these unmaskings were instituted, who did it. We know. Why they did it is what we want to know. We want to find out, and we want to remove all these redactions that have been blacked out from the papers and make the government prove that there is a legitimate national security interest for us not being able to see certain things. In other words, open government. Let's see what happened. Is it a secret? If it's a secret, tell me that it's a national secret and prove it to the court.
Well, of course, they committed a fraud on the Fisa Court. So the credibility of these agencies right now, I have to say, is pretty much at an all-time low. When we come back from the break, I'm going to play a statement from John Brennan. Now, Brennan, Clapper, Comey, they were up to their eyeballs in all of this. Remember, James Comey famously said he snuck in because he could get away with it, 2 FBI agents rather than going through what he knew was the normal protocol, which would have been dealing with the White House counsel. He decided not to do that. We're going to talk about why he did that, where this goes and what it means. So again, we'll do that when we come back from the break. But again, if you're just joining us late, we had a phone conversation with federal court today on these issues. We've been litigating these issues for a long time. We have taken on the IRS and won. We've taken on the State Department. We've taken on the Treasury Department. We have taken on the FBI and the Department of Justice. We caught them, remember in that one group, what the FBI said, we don't have them, the Department of Justice does, and then vice versa. That's because of this going to court on these Freedom of Information Act requests. Remember, we found out about what was going on with money going to the son of the head of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas's son, in that money that was going supposedly for aid to the Middle East? Yeah, we got that through Freedom of Information Act litigation. And there's a lot of that going on right now. All right, we're coming to the last segment. We'll take a call on any topic. 1-800-684-3110. 1-800-684-3110 or Facebook and Periscope. Get your questions in. Hey, welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. And I want to tell you something that I think is really important here, and that is who's in charge of this, who was in charge of this. We just got a great question in from Charlotte on Facebook. She asked, why were they, Tammy on Facebook, if this unmasking started at the top, then why not go to the top? Obama and Biden should be implicated as well. Now, look, I mean, the evidence is going to go where it goes. Presidents have broad constitutional authority in these areas. Remember that. I don't want to underplay the importance of that. Whether they'll be asked questions or not, that's a different question. I don't think cases are going to be brought against them. I don't see that, again, because of the constitutional issues at play. But there is an attempt right now, and I think it's fair to say this, to spin the narrative. John Brennan's done a lot of that spinning. He was doing it on MSNBC. Take a listen to this.
So we saw recently with the acting director of national intelligence, Richard Grenell, a hand-picked individual who I think has demonstrated his loyalty to Mr. Trump over the years, declassifying the names of individuals who had unmasked some names in intelligence reports, with the implication that that was wrongdoing. Well, it wasn't. We were carrying out our responsibilities correctly.
Yeah, I love breaking this down. I'm going to start with Ann. He says, so recently the acting director of intelligence, Rick Grenell, a handpicked individual who I think has demonstrated loyalty to Mr. Trump. Now, who would not, if you were the president of the United States, Stan, would you pick a DNI director that you knew and you trusted and was handpicked?
Of course you would, Jay. That's what you do when you surround yourself with advisors. And what did the acting director of national intelligence release? He released a list of names that, according to the Obama administration officials, did this unmasking by the book. I mean, why would there be any harm in that, Jay? And when you couple with the sound you just played with, Jay, with a couple of other pieces of evidence, first of all, Ben Rhodes says that the White House didn't know anything about this. And then Susan Rice testified that Joe Biden stayed behind for that meeting. What I think Mr. Clapper actually objects to is that the very own words of the Obama administration officials are the evidence that is now incriminating them, Jay. I mean, it's not me saying it. It's not you saying it. It's the testimony of Susan Rice, and it's the on-air interviews of Ben Rhodes and James Clapper. It's their own words, Jay.
You're absolutely correct. All right, I'm going to go to the phones, 1-800-684-3110. I'm also going to take questions in via Facebook. Let's go to Todd in Utah. Todd?
Hi, thank you very much for taking my call.
Sure.
Besides the different agencies that do redactions on a paper you're requesting, who else has the authority to redact provide those papers without any redactions? Is that the AG, the president?
Well, the agency itself, Andy, has to make the determination as to whether it's classified or subject to national securities. In other words, there are some exemptions to it. What we argue over is they'll try to say, Andy, everything's exempt, or we'll get a page that has 2 sentences and then the entire document is blacked out.
That's exactly right, Jay. I have seen documents that we have through ACLJ sought through FOIA requests from the Department of State, and all we have is pages and pages and pages of blacked out information with nothing on it whatsoever. The State Department has decided that it's not going to show anything, so it just blacks it out and gives us a stack of blacked out paper. We've now got to go back into court and to see why that is and to convince the judge that that should not be blacked out and make the State Department, for example, in that instance, come in and prove to court why, prove in court why that information should not be redacted and why the public should be permitted to know. So redaction is an agency determination in the first stage anyway.
All right, let's go. We got a question that's not on this topic, but we said it's the last segment, so we take it on all topics. And Tim's calling from Nevada on line 5. Tim, go ahead.
Thanks for taking my call. I just had a question.
Sure.
With the new stimulus bill proposed by the House, which has nothing really to do with the coronavirus, as far as I'm concerned, there's still people who haven't received the first stimulus check, and now the Democrats want to give them to illegals and support pot stores and everything else under the sun.
Let me jump right to Than Bennett on this. This new stimulus, this multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package, it's dead on arrival in the Senate, right, Than?
Dead on arrival in the United States Senate, and for good reason, Jay. Just a couple of very quick stats. You're talking about an 1,815-page bill. The summary of it, Jay, is 90 pages alone. I have it right here. The price tag on it is $3 trillion, and the caller is exactly right, correct. It's possible there may be some more stimulus needed. Some of that is still being debated. But, Jay, this bill is not that. This is Nancy Pelosi's wish list that she's proposed before, and it was defeated. We raised the alarm on that. We're raising the alarm on this one as well. And Leader McConnell has already said the United States Senate will not even take it up.
Than, do we have a group of our team going through that stimulus to see what's in it so we can report that to our listeners and members the next day or two?
Yes, we do, Jay. Now, I will tell you, right off the bat, I can tell you most of it is the same list that we saw before. The price tag is bigger, so they give more money to the same accounts and then add some additional wish list items on there. But I would just tell you maybe a third of it is coronavirus related. The rest of it is the wish list that James Clyburn and Speaker Pelosi wanted.
I want to go over that with our listeners in the next couple of days because this is going to be getting a lot more information. All right, we're going back to the phones. Lisa's calling from California. She's on line 2. Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call, and God bless you for all your hard work.
Thanks.
My question is about the Fisa Court. We now know that the Fisa warrants were solely based on Steele's ridiculous information, and that terrifies me. I wonder about those judges. If they're willing to accept that outrageous information, can they be replaced?
Well, those judges had a fraud committed on them. I want to be clear, Lisa. I don't think you can blame the judges here, Andy. Those judges were lied to with affidavits from the FBI about the authenticity of the documentation and what was utilized and the verification process that went in. They were lied to. There was a fraud committed on the court. I don't want to blame the judges here. Andy?
No, that's true. The judges, by the way, are on a rotating basis so that they're appointed by the Chief Justice, and they do rotate. But the victims here, in a sense, were the court judges themselves, because they were told the information that was contained in the Steele dossier was correct, and it was vouched for by everybody along the line in the Justice Department who approved it. And the judges, and the chief judge, of course, issued an order not that long ago condemning the procedures that were used by the FBI and the Department of Justice in bringing these documents before the court. So if anybody was defrauded, it was the judges of the Fisa Court. Don't blame the judges themselves. This is the information that was brought to them and that they acted upon based upon the representations of the government.
Absolutely. All right, Dave, really quick, last call. Go ahead.
Hey, Jay, thanks for taking my call. As I understand it, the judge already ruled against amicus briefs because there are only two interested parties in a criminal trial. There's General Flynn, the defendant, in the United States government, and that he ruled against amicus briefs earlier because an amicus brief is for third-party interested people. And if you can just touch on that and tell me if that's correct.
Yeah, let me do it really quick here. So he 27 times he said he wanted no outside briefing from parties that wanted to engage on the Flynn matter. 27 times. Then he decided to change his mind and said, you know what, I want to have not only a brief, I'm going to appoint a former judge basically as the special counsel. We are looking at all the legal ramifications of that right now. I can tell you that. I appreciate you calling in. Hey, folks, thanks for your support of the ACLJ. ACLJ.org is the best way to do it online. And as I said, we would lawyers in court, via phone, of course, even today. Tomorrow, I expect to have some very big news on one of our Christian persecution cases. Looks like we're going to have some big news, a good report coming out. We'll save that for tomorrow when we have verification, but it looks good. Again, thank you for your support of the ACLJ. We'll see you tomorrow.